Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
But he said it would be very, very bad.
Let's finish the analysis. Half my job is the invisible job, half, of actually planning for all outcomes, good to bad, the whole range. And what we're doing at the moment is working that up. It'll take time. This is not the sort of thing you make up or write in a comment piece over a weekend. It is something you actually have to work out in great detail, and that's what we're doing right now. About this. It's in my job, I don't think out loud, and I don't make guesses. Yeah? Those two things, I try to make decisions. You make those based on the data. That data is being gathered. We've got 50, nearly 60 sectoral analyses already done. We've got planning work going on the customs. We've got planning work going on 22 other issues which are critical, 127 all told. All of them have got to be grounded before we come to a conclusion what it looks like.
So, just to be clear, has the government undertaken any impact assessments on the implications of leaving the EU for different sectors of the
not in sectors. I think the
economy.
What we do have, or not do have, the Treasury, of course, has got an OBR forecast which has an implication. Although even that's pretty crude. That's done from the average, I think, of all the external forecasts of impact on the economy and so on. So there's no sort of systematic impact assessment.
So the answer to the question is no.
Yeah.
So the government hasn't undertaken any impact assessments on the implications for leaving the EU for different sectors of the British economy. So there isn't one, for example, on the automotive sector.
On the
automotive sector?
No, not I'm aware of, no.
Is there one on aerospace?
Not I'm aware of,
no. One on financial services?
Well, I think the answer is going to be no to all of them.
No to all of them, right. Now, doesn't it strike you, Secretary of State, as rather strange, given experience around the committee in which you have, the government undertakes impact assessments on all sorts of things all of the time, that on the most fundamental change that we are facing as a country, you've just told us that the government hasn't undertaken any impact assessments at all looking at the impact on individual sectors of the economy.
The Brexit Secretary has been accused of gross negligence after admitting that the government has not tried to calculate the effect Brexit might have on the British economy. Meanwhile, Theresa May has been trying to tackle the thorny issue of what happens to the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic. That's the issue that scuppered Brexit negotiations on Monday. She's been talking to the Irish Prime Minister and with Arlene Foster, the leader of Northern Ireland's DUP. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar.
3, 2, 1...
Theresa May needs some comfort and joy in the cabinet, in her party in Ireland, North and South. If only everyone could sing from the same hymn sheet on Brexit. Her message, start trade talks. We could all get what we want.
We aim to deliver this as part of our overall trade deal between the United Kingdom and the European Union.
Labour's loving Theresa May's troubles.
Brexit negotiations in a shambles. This government is clearly not fit for the future.
Tory Brexiteers are ramping up the pressure too. They say no more concessions.
Will she apply a new coat of paint to her red lines? Because I fear on Monday they were beginning to look a little bit pink.
And if we have a problem, would it help if I came over to Brussels with you to sort them out?
The DUP heard Mrs May's pledge to preserve the Union, but want more guarantees Brexit means the same deal for the whole UK.
Can you give a specific commitment that nothing will be done that creates any barrier constitutionally, politically, economically or regulatory between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom?
Mrs May was on the phone to the DUP leader today, but still no sign of agreement. And in Dublin, a clear threat. Ireland's leader wants a promise of free trade and no hard north-south border. And he'd veto the start of trade talks at next week's EU summit to get it.
But if it isn't possible to move to phase 2 next week because of the problems that have arisen, well, then we can pick it up, of course, in the new year.
The Prime Minister spoke to him on the phone today too, and still no sign of another meeting in Brussels this week. The President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker's spokesman, went so far today as to say his boss wanted to prevent Mrs May's government from collapsing. So how clear is Britain's future after Brexit? Not at all, according to the Brexit Secretary today.
So there's nothing that's...
He told MPs Brexit would have an impact on business so great there was no point in predictions. Look at the chairman's face.
So there isn't one, for example, on the automotive sector?
On the...
Automotive sector?
No, not I'm aware of, no.
Is there one on aerospace?
Not I'm aware of, no.
No. One on financial services?
Well, I think the answer's going to be no to all of them.
No to all of them, right.
And now a new cause for Brexiteer Tories to complain. The Chancellor says Britain won't shirk its divorce bill, deal or no deal.
That's just not a credible scenario. That's not the kind of country we are, and frankly, it would not make us a credible partner for future international agreements.
But Theresa May's team says there'll be no deal, including cash, until Brexit's agreed. Tonight, goodwill's in short supply in the Cabinet too. John Pienaar, BBC News, Westminster.
Here, Theresa May took to the phone today, speaking to parties on both sides of the Irish border in a bid to break the Brexit deadlock. And there was a surprising admission by her Brexit secretary today over papers that were supposed to look at the impact on the UK. Our political correspondent Carl Dinnan joins me live now from the House of Commons. First, the Irish border issue. Any sign of movement there, Carl?
Plenty of talking here today, Alistair, but no sign of any real progress. As you say, Mrs May has spoken to Arlene Foster of the DUP and the Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar, but nothing seems to have been agreed with either of them. In fact, Mr Varadkar even suggested today that talks on the Brexit deal could drift on into January. Now, the government here is desperate to avoid that. They're very anxious that this gets wrapped up this month. At the same time, the Prime Minister is having to watch her back. Her own Brexiteers are worried that under all of this pressure she might soften her Brexit demands. And in here in the Commons today, they asked for reassurance that she was going to deliver what they say people voted for in the referendum.
They voted to end the free movement of people. They voted to stop sending billions and billions of pounds to the EU each and every year. And they voted to make our laws in our own country judged by our own judges. Prime Minister, are we on course still to deliver that?
Before my right honourable friend next goes to Brussels, will she apply a new coat of paint to her red lines? Because I fear on Monday they were beginning to look a little bit pink.
The answer is yes, we are on course to deliver what the people of this country voted for when they voted to leave the European Union.
As you suggested, there is trouble on another front too, with Labour calling for the resignation of Brexit Secretary David Davis. They say he had promised them some impact papers on Brexit. He now says those don't even exist. But the real action is going on behind closed doors, with the government and the DUP trying to agree a form of words that Mrs May can take to Brussels. No sign that there is that form of words yet. There are signs that she's clearing her diary to take them to Brussels if she gets them.
Carl, thanks.
It's been a day of truth-telling to committees as Brexit Secretary David Davis said impact assessments on the effect of Brexit don't exist, to the consternation of listening MPs. Elsewhere, the Chancellor said the Cabinet was yet to have a full discussion of the government's preferred end-state position. That's where it wants to be when Brexit is over. Our political editor Gary Gibbon has this report.
European commissioners thought this was going to be the meeting at which they signed off on a Brexit divorce agreement. Instead, Brussels is waiting for Britain to come back with words it can get agreement for back home.
3, 2, 1.
Prime Minister tonight switching on the Christmas lights in Downing Street. Earlier she spoke to the DUP leader Arlene Foster by phone. At Prime Minister's questions, Jeremy Corbyn mocked her for falling out with the Northern Ireland party whose support came at a price after the election.
Someone forgot to share the details of the Irish border deal with the DUP. Surely, Mr Speaker, there are 1.5 billion reasons why the Prime Minister really haven't forgotten to do that.
I think it was a little difficult to detect the question that there was within that interruption. We will ensure that there is no hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. We will do that while we respect the constitutional integrity of the United Kingdom and while we respect the internal market and protect the internal market of the United Kingdom. And those Labour members who shout, "How?" that's the whole point of the second phase of the negotiations.
But speaking to MPs today, the Chancellor confirmed there have been no discussions yet between ministers on what kind of Brexit Britain wants to secure from those negotiations.
The Cabinet has had general discussions about our Brexit negotiations, but we haven't had a specific mandating of an end state position.
But I absolutely want to restate.
Speaking in Dublin, the Irish Prime Minister, who also spoke to Theresa May today, sounded downbeat about the chances of securing a deal at next week's EU summit.
But if it isn't possible to move to phase 2 next week because of the problems that have arisen, well, then we can pick it up, of course, in the new year.
Back in Parliament, MPs were asking the Brexit Secretary if the government had produced economic forecasts for the impact of Brexit on different sectors of the economy.
There's no sort of systematic impact assessment.
So the answer to the question is no. Yeah. So the government hasn't undertaken any impact assessments on the implications for leaving the EU for different sectors of the British economy. So there isn't one, for example, on the automotive sector.
On the
automotive sector?
No, not I'm aware of, no.
Is there one on aerospace?
Not I'm aware of, no.
No. One on financial services?
Well, I think the answer is going to be no to all of them.
No to all of them, right.
David Davis said such reports would have been of no value and not a good use of stretched resources, so a different approach was taken.
The bulk of the work involved officials ringing round different sectors, asking what impact they thought Brexit would have on their businesses. One official who had the opportunity to leaf through the files said they looked pretty unremittingly gloomy.
The fallout from Theresa May's mishandled trip to Brussels on Monday still threatens the chances of securing progress on Brexit next week. And if the Brexit talks don't move forward, Tory demands for suspending or walking away from those talks will grow.
Happy Christmas, everybody.
Well, the political turmoil over Ireland is rattling an already extremely anxious business community. With more on that, I'm joined by our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy. Siobhan, give us the latest.
Well, Cathy, I've been speaking to the president of the CBI today, Paul Drexler, and he had some very strong words for the government. He said that there had to be an agreement on the Irish border issue now, that the time for phase 1 talks is over, that business needs to move on to the substantive issue of whether or not they're actually going to get a deal with Europe. And that lack of progress and indecision is beginning to bite right now in terms of businesses pulling their investment and actually potentially making decisions to move away from the UK. And crucially, he said, Cathy, as each day passes where there is no decision, the long-term effects on the British economy are potentially irreversible, he said. So I started by asking him the very obvious question is, what happens if you don't get an agreement in the next few days? Here's what he had to say.
The bottom line is they will reach an agreement in the next few days. They must do for the citizens of the UK and Europe. That is their duty to the people they are there to serve. That's what I expect them to do.
What if they don't, Paul?
Every day that we don't make progress has got consequences. And those consequences ultimately will be measured in lower economic growth, lower job opportunities and lower investment in the UK. So over time, it gets more and more and more difficult to the point of the impact on the UK is one we won't recover from. Indecision and lack of progress is now biting. It's biting for real, and it will have real long-term impact with people taking decisions they won't reverse.
Aren't these all just threats? Are these businesses really going to up sticks and move? We've heard that before in the past with banks, for example, and it hasn't happened.
The reality is, if you have to make a choice today about where to place jobs and where to place people, you will not make that investment in the UK where there's greater uncertainty if you have better choices elsewhere. And at the moment, for many businesses, the level of uncertainty in the UK is just too high.
From the House of Commons is Conservative MP and former Northern Ireland Secretary Theresa Villiers, who backed Brexit. Theresa Villas, government has done no impact assessment at all. Should it have done?
The government's conducted a huge amount of work, including analysis on the options for leaving the European Union. Just because they haven't produced documents which fit with the resolution which was adopted in Parliament doesn't mean they haven't been working extremely hard on this hugely important choice for the country.
It's not quite what I asked you. They've made no impact evaluation, i.e. looked at sector by sector to see where there would need to be real effort if we did leave the European Union.
Well, they have been conducting analysis on these important issues.
But David Davis said they haven't, and they got nothing.
He said that they hadn't conducted impact assessments and forecasts in the way provided for in the parliamentary resolution, but they actually published 850 pages of analysis on the different sectors and provided that to the Brexit Committee.
Well, that was something which one MP described as a cut and paste job. There was no research there at all.
I remember the day I walked back into the Northern Ireland office after the referendum, the civil servants there were already preparing for the work that needed to be done to implement the result of the referendum. There has been intensive work that has gone on ever since the early hours of the morning when the result of the referendum became apparent.
All right, well, let's go to the other end of the equation. The Cabinet hasn't discussed an end state, according to Philip Hammond. Should it have done?
Well, I do find that surprising, but obviously they will have discussed the speeches given by the Prime Minister where she has mapped out elements of what she wants to see as part of the end state.
That's not the Cabinet discussing the end state.
They will clearly have discussed the decisions made in the run-up to those speeches, but yes, obviously the Cabinet needs to discuss, have a more detailed discussion of the end state. I think that's very important, and I'm surprised that they haven't done that.
Well, let's turn to your own expertise. You've sat down with the DUP over the years, or months that you were up there in Northern Ireland. Do you think they'll accept the EU deal with the UK that Mrs May approved on Monday?
I think there is a chance that we can find a form of words which works for the UK government, for the DUP and for the Commission and the EU 27. It won't be easy, but clearly some progress has been made over the last few days towards the sufficient progress threshold set by the EU. The Prime Minister has now been very clear that she's not going to agree to anything which creates a new border in the Irish Sea.
Well, you don't sound very optimistic. The truth of the matter is the DUP are saying they want Mrs May to go back in there and negotiate an entirely new deal.
Well, clearly discussions are continuing between the different parties, and it's right that they should do so. I don't think there's necessarily a huge amount of difference between the relevant people here, and there is, I think, a willingness on all sides to move to stage 2 if at all possible, because there is a recognition that it's in the interest of the United Kingdom and the EU, including in particular Ireland.
Just a quick one. Jacob Rees-Mogg, your political ally, said the UK's red lines are looking a bit pink. Do you agree?
I don't. I think the Prime Minister continues to be clear about her red lines. We will be leaving the customs union and the single market. But we are going to be working towards a comprehensive trade deal. That's the position now, as it has been since the days fairly shortly after the referendum.
Theresa Villas, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Theresa May found a new form of words today, which may soon be adopted by school children in the work-shy world over. When asked about Monday's attempted Brexit deal on Northern Ireland, she merely claimed very good progress has been made. Sounded a bit hollow in the House of Commons, met with laughter. Tonight, however, there were some positive sounds coming from the Irish Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar.
I agreed to examine any text that they would put forward in a positive light, understanding that it is in our interest as a country to move to phase 2, because that's when we talk about transition and trade and aviation, all those things that are so important to Ireland. And I want to get back into a space where we have very good relations with the United Kingdom again. So I agreed to look at any text with an open mind and with a positive outlook. But I also emphasised the fact that when it comes to the substance and the meaning of what was agreed on Monday, that I can't depart from that.
Lee Varadkar, well, our political editor Nick Watt is here. How do you think those words will be greeted in Downing Street tonight, Nick?
Well, important intervention by the Taoiseach saying, I'm open to new wording, but it must be in addition to the current wording. Now, the Prime Minister, Theresa May, she wants to avoid what happened at the weekend when the DUP were not shown the wording. So she's consulting the DUP on the text, and she is also talking to Sinn Féin. But the point is she has a very difficult balancing act. She's got to win over the DUP, but not in a way that Sinn Féin and Dublin therefore tumble out of the equation. And I have to say it is looking very difficult. I spoke to a DUP source this evening who said the existing wording is absolutely toxic and has got to go. I spoke to another DUP source who said they do not like the wording. They could just about envisage a situation where the existing wording stays, but the new wording would have to be so dramatically in their favour for that to have an add to all of that. Michel Barnier has effectively said that there's 48 hours to sort this out.
Gosh, that clears the head, doesn't it? An intervention from Philip Hammond, the Chancellor on Brexit too. What are you hearing?
That's right. Earlier today, he told the Treasury Select Committee it would be inconceivable for the UK not to pay its financial settlement to the EU even if we don't have a deal. Downing Street came out a few hours later and said, I think not. And they said that the offer from the UK really is contingent on getting that future trade relationship. And interestingly, a few hours earlier, we had David Davis, the Brexit Secretary, confirming that the government had not carried out a formal impact assessment of the consequences of Brexit, and that was enough to ensure that the Brexit Select Committee, voting on party lines, voted that he's not in contempt of Parliament.
Nick, thank you very much.